Rupinder Kaur Bains, and today is December 27th, 2015. I was 16 years old. I was a student in high school, junior in high school. I was growing up in the state of Oregon, in the United States. Throughout early part of the year and through May, June coming up, we were hearing both through newspapers and a lot of it through the radio, BBC and international stations, Radio Moscow, Netherlands, etc. And the siege of the temple, all that was kind of progressing, and we'd been hearing about that. So I think when the siege was happening for several days, and we knew food and things weren't being let in, and the military army was in the state. So that was all, coming up and apparent to us. And we'd been hearing about Sant Bhindranwale for the previous few years, kind of leading up to some of that. So just updates on that, basically what was happening. And I was still a teenager, so a lot of it, my dad, my older brother, etc. were hearing. So we kind of learned through them and through the newspapers and stuff. Since we weren't necessarily listening to the Indian media per se, it was mostly, BBC, Mark Tully was a great reporter at the time from BBC, who was always reporting from there. So, I'm not sure I realized if it was biased or not. It seemed at the time that it was okay. Of course, things came out afterwards that we learned a lot more. But at the time, I think, given that it was an international media and not Indian media, I think we were feeling like the Sikhs and the media was covering it okay. At the time, they obviously felt threatened by Sant Bhindranwale, and our impression, at least at the time, was that the government wanted to flush him out, basically, that he was a hold-up in Darbar Sahib, and they put a siege on it with the assumption they were going to, that was the way they were going to bring him out. And apparently they waited, probably not long enough, they waited just a few days, and all of a sudden they attacked. So that's the immediate at the time. Now how his history and why they attacked him specific, that's leading up to that, but immediately that's what the idea was. They thought him plus, quote, his terrorists or whatever were in the Darbar Sahib, and how do you get them out? When you're 16 years old, you're young, you're that very impressionable age, that's when you're kind of maturing and growing and learning about the world around you. And Darbar Sahib had always been a holy place and a close place in our hearts. So I remember, even at that age, being very sad, and it doesn't leave you, those emotions. I used to ride my bike to school in the mornings, and I remember crying while riding my bike to school. So it hurt. So as far as the Sikh community, this was in Oregon in the early 80s. There really weren't that many Punjabis or Sikhs to begin with. There was no Gurdwara nearby. There were very few families, a lot of mixed families. So there was some discussion, probably not as much. It was a lot of it, our immediate family talked about it quite a bit, with my siblings and my parents. So we were quite aware of everything that was happening. Now, one of the things I do remember is there weren't very many Indians per se, even in my high school that I was going to. But my teachers knew I was a Punjabi, a Sikh. So I remember in those few days, within the attack time frame, within a few days, there was a 60 minutes episode on Sant Bhindranwale, and then what was happening in Punjab with the attack. And as soon as the show was starting, the initial credits were starting up, and they mentioned what the topic was, I got a call from my English teacher. So Mr. Hansen called me and said, "Hey, Rupinder, did you know there's the 60 minutes? You should watch it." And we already had it on, but I knew that my teachers and others were hearing about it too, and were aware that we were Sikhs and were bringing it up to my attention. So that was kind of nice to hear. I remember that. Right. So at that time, we didn't go back to Punjab for many years. My first return trip was in 1995, so it had already been like 11 years since the event. But again, having those memories and those thoughts about with the Darbar Sahib, I remember being very emotional getting there to begin with. But I remember the buildings having bullets, and I actually took specific pictures and photographs. I remember the stairs going up to the museum, and the stairs themselves had bullet holes. I remember taking video and pictures of that. So all over we were seeing still the signs, even 11 years later, you know. And a lot of it, you're looking for signs because you know about this event, right? So so it was quite a few years later, but at the time the Akal Takht was already being built, and there was some work going on inside, but the facade was kind of done, and so it didn't have that vision that the initial attack would have had, but still we saw signs. So this was after the summer break from school, and I was starting my senior year in high school. Yeah, so that was in Salem, Oregon. Immediately, I mean, as soon as she was attacked, and again, BBC was on top of it. The reports were coming in constantly. So we were very aware of what was happening. Again, international coverage, so it wasn't just the Indian government's news. But at the same time, it wasn't today's internet kind of, it was still from the perception of the few reporters that were there. So yeah, we immediately knew what was happening. Honestly, we weren't big listeners of the Indian, even shortwave radio Indian stations. This, somehow BBC sticks out, but I remember Radio Netherlands, Radio Moscow was pretty commonly listened to. So a lot of the international coverage covered it. I don't specifically remember listening to Indian radios per se. A bit of shock. I mean, it was almost not quite surprised either. I mean, you expected better from people, but when they did attack, given Sikh history in general, we've been attacked so many times that it wasn't as big a surprise, I think. Even as a teenager, you kind of, it's like, oh, it was sad and you knew it, but the extent, I think we may not have immediately known, just because sometimes media tends to blow things up anyway a lot of times, and you weren't sure how bad it was. Of course, over time, the numbers and the things coming back, kind of said, was really, yeah. Even then, we had news reports, and we knew it was somehow backed by the Indian politicians, the Indian, whether it was police departments and things like that, but maybe the front end were almost criminal-like folks that were maybe being prodded by the police or the government officials of the time. It kind of seemed organized, and how do that many people know exactly where Sikh homes are and where they live and where their businesses are? Seems like they had some direction or something. So that was kind of the impression that we had. I haven't spoken to anyone. A lot of over the time as I've gone through my career and worked, and we have Sikh individuals that have come to that I get to know over time at work. I've had a lot of them that I've spoken to have had, even though I didn't say we didn't have any personal family members, but a lot of them I talked to. My mom Maji was in the train, was attacked and killed. Somebody's other family member. So we hear about. So I have talked to other Sikhs who were in Delhi or around that time. Even in our more recent trips, when we go to India, even let's say the person driving the taxi, for example, is Sardar. We'll have a conversation and they'll talk about how they were impacted. So you do hear about a lot of stories coming out of friends and family who did have a lot of family members. I think a great deal. I think it defines who we are today. Granted, at an individual level, I can't say I've done certain steps to make others aware besides conversations, etc. But I think one thing we've taken is our next generation. We've, if the concept of the government was to somehow eliminate or reduce Sikhi or slow it in some way, I think our answer was our kids. We're saying that they're going to be Sikhs. We're going to teach them about Sikhi, make sure they're Sikhs. So to me, that's our response to this. It's a Hindu India, Hindu government, for the most part. Sikhs are a tiny minority. Granted, we've had many Sikhs who've gone into incredible positions, but still the main say is by the government. They've protected these people. They've if there were any proof or things like that, they're hidden. I know lawyers and things, the Sikh are being represented, but I think that's why the progress isn't there that should be. I know to them it's history, like we learn about the initial Kalugars of the Sikhs. Just like history, they have to learn it, they have to know it, they have to know what that means for our Qaum. Where do we go from here? How do we keep this from happening again? Undoubtedly things happen, it's happened in the past, but I think we have to learn as to why it happened, and grow from there as a Qaum.